Welcome to the Potential Leader Lab. I'm your host, Perry Moffmer, and this is where we explore how to create a better world for those we care deeply about by dismantling our delusions and acting our way into a different way of being. And I'd welcome you to episode 63, Your Evolution is What Others Say It Is. So this will be central to Explore, Experiment, Evolve framework that we always talk about. And I really, in this one, we're going to kind of talk about the myth of the self-determined evolution. Why we think we control our own growth, but we actually don't. And the hard truth kind of is your evolution is dictated by the impact you have on others, not by what you think you have become. So essentially what I'm saying is on the Explore, Experiment, Evolve framework, we want to focus most of our own energy on exploring and experimenting because by and large, our evolution is determined by what we get back from other people. I mean, I want to be careful with this because as we go through this, you'll hear this, but there's a balance. And the balance is you want to have a firm idea of what you're trying to accomplish from an evolutionary standpoint for yourself. But I just want us to be clear that it isn't up to us if we finally evolved to that point yet, because most of those things, most of those behaviors we're going to try, we are doing it to positively impact other people. So we have to get feedback from them to see if that's actually working or not. And so we can't do it in a vacuum. That's all I'm saying. I don't want this to turn into 100%. Our self-image is determined by other people. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is being able to have a little bit of gray area and discernment for ourselves to know that if I'm working on specific behavior changes to elicit, to create that better world for other people and elicit different responses from people, then I have to be aware that how that lands matters. And what I intend doesn't. It does from my own deep down in my soul, but if I'm not effective, if it doesn't land correctly, I've got to figure out a different way to do it. So that's really what we're talking about here. So there is a bit of nuance. This isn't a definitive, hey, you're only what other people say you are, because I'm going to talk on a little bit about Sartre's book in his play, his play No Exit, but it's not that brutal. I'm just using it as an example. So society, by and large, sells us the idea that self-mastery and personal development is an individual journey. You know, you read all the books on what you need to do. It's always it's self-development. We self-help books. So we talk about ourself a lot. We talk about you. We talk about, things we are going to do differently. Much like organizations, it's always, we have to be careful and not do too much navel gazing here, right? We can't be so focused on just us and what we want that we don't include feedback from the outside. And really, if you want to think about this, we want to build ourselves to be antifragile. And Nassim Taleb wrote that book, Anti-Fragile, and he talks about the difference between, he says that if something's fragile, it breaks easily. The opposite of fragile actually isn't strong, because something that's strong resists shock, right? So something strong resists shock. And he said, what you want to be is anti-fragile, and anti-fragile people or systems or organizations actually benefit from shock. They benefit from things like stressors and volatility and mistakes and failures and faults. That's what makes them stronger, much like our immune system. Our immune system is anti-fragile. The more it's tested, the stronger it gets. And so if you think about this just conceptually, we want to get rid of the thought that we want to be strong. We actually want to be anti-fragile. And that's really where we go with this discussion, is that constant thought of I'm going to keep moving forward, getting feedback, and actually to use another term that we're all familiar with in business is an MVP, like a minimum viable product. If you've ever read the book The Lean Startup by I think it was Steve Blank and Eric Ries, they talk about an MVP, a minimum viable product, and one of the pieces of that is one of the three components is enables feedback for future elements. And so you create something as a baseline, you get it out to get feedback on it, and then you iterate as you go, instead of spending months or maybe even years creating the quote unquote perfect product and then rolling it out only to find that your study group or you and your partner or your company or whatever didn't take into account many things that the public actually wants in the product. And so then it's a huge failure. Their thought was get something that's workable, then throw it out there and let people give you feedback, actual feedback, so you can iterate. Well, let's think about that for us. because our identity isn't really what we say it is. It's how other people experience us. So what if we looked at ourselves like we wanted to act like, treat ourselves as a product from a leader standpoint, like we're going to create a leader they're going to create a better world for those we care about. So we have to gather those people, because those are the ones we're talking about, by the way. We're not talking about everybody. You're going to identify who these people are, people whose feedback you value. And then you're going to put yourself out there as a minimum viable product and say, okay, this is where I'm starting. And then as you gather feedback, then you can iterate, right? That takes, if you shift, it's just interesting how if you shift into that mindset and your leadership becomes a product, now it's something outside of us that we can work on. It isn't a judgment against us. So we have to shift our focus from internal self-assessment to external impact. So we take that from, constantly the voice in our head, like constantly listening to the voice in our head, which, by the way, if it was a person, we wouldn't be friends with it very long. So we got to be careful, right? So shift from that to external impact. Shift from self-assessment, internal self-assessment, to external impact. Because I'll give you an example. Like you might say, I want to become more patient, right? And you say to yourself, oh, I'm being more patient with all these people. But what if the people closest to you don't notice anything about you being more patient? Have you actually become more patient just because you tend to think that you're being more patient? Because, by the way, we're fairly myopic. We don't really know ourselves very well. And self-awareness, there's a couple components to it. One is we know who we are, and the second is that we know how we're perceived by others. And we can have both types. We can have neither, or we can have one of them. And so we have to be very careful that oftentimes who we feel we are is not how we're perceived by other people. And our evolution is truly validated by the echo we create in other people, not the monologue in your own head. So again, we have to shift outside that monologue that's going on in our head about how well we're doing or who we are, our impact. What we really want to evaluate it by, it's really validated by the echo we create in other people. What do we hear back? When we put this out, what comes back? That's what we have to pay attention to. And again, I want to be clear. I don't want everybody like chasing this. We're not trying to chase other people's versions of us. That's not what I'm talking about. We need a great deal of discernment in this process, because what I'm talking about is filtering feedback. So you have to be very explicit for yourself as to who that feedback's going to come from and who you want it from and how you value it, right? You have to discern these things. This isn't just like you're throwing it out to the world and then taking it all in. The best example I can give you of this is like a 360 assessment. And I had a great coach tell me one time about how do I process this? And so they were going over the 360 with me, and there were a bunch of comments. There was both quantitative and qualitative feedback for me. Well, some of the qualitative feedback were, people had written down, well, this is what I think Perry ought to stop doing, start doing, that kind of stuff. And she gave me this, it stuck with me. It was years ago, and it just stuck with me. She said, I want you to get a red, yellow, and green highlighter. And I want you to highlight the stuff in green that you want to take action on, highlight the stuff in yellow that you want to think about, and highlight the stuff in red that you're going to ignore. And I thought that was so liberating, because she said, it's just feedback. You don't have to act on all of it. And that's really important that we understand that. Just because people give us feedback does not mean we have to act on it, right? We have to decide, does it align with what we want most? Because they don't know that. They may not know us. They may not know what we're trying to accomplish as much as we do. So again, this isn't an all or nothing thing. There's a lot of gray area here that requires a lot of discernment. All right. So let's talk about this model in action. So we have explore. This is where curiosity is. And are you exploring to expand yourself or serve others? So ask yourself that question. Am I trying to expand myself or serve other people? And if I'm doing, hopefully what I'm doing is doing the first to do the second. So you just want to be able to connect those things. So you just want to be able to tie in my expanding of myself in service to other people. Now, my experimentation, remember, everything that I do, every action that I take lands somewhere. And this experiment doesn't mean anything if no one else experiences that outcome. I have to be in the moment. Like, it's very hard. I got to be honest with you. The great thing about finite games, the great thing about playing a sport or all these things is that they spend, or great golfers, or even military operations, or any of those things, they practice 90% of the time, so that the 5 to 10% of the time they perform, it is dead on, right? The reason that a great golfer can hit that shot out of a sand trap is because they've hit it thousands of times. So when they get in there and they have to do it for real, it's automatic. We often don't get that option because we can't do the work we're talking about in a vacuum. We can't do it in what I'll call a safe environment. We can't do it in a kind environment. We have to do it in the moment. We have to practice as we play. And that takes a different kind of emotional commitment. We all know that, right? The only way we can test a new behavior and see if it lands correctly is to try it with people. And when it doesn't land, we have to figure a way out of it in the moment. We can't say, "Whoop, that was an experiment. Sorry about that." I mean, well, actually you can. I guess now that I think about it, you can say that. If you're really comfortable and confident, you can say that. And then the true evolution happens when people around you respond differently to you. The shift in their perception proves your growth. I want you to think about that. The minute you see that shift in them, the minute they start responding to you differently, that's evolution for you. That's meaningful progress. When you've created that shift for them. We always say the relentless few, right? It's the easiest way to change other people's behaviors to change our own. If I focus on me and changing my behavior, I can elicit a different response in people. If all I'm doing as a leader is focused on changing other people's behavior, like I'm trying to make other people behave differently, that's a losing battle. And not one you want to fight, to be honest with you. It's not very fun for you or for them. Now, the tie-in to the relentless view on this, which is, what I like, is that we're all broken. So our evolution is never complete. It's always, go back to kintsugi and the repairing of the pottery with the gold, dust, and the lacquer. We're all breaking all the time and putting ourselves back together, breaking and putting ourselves back together. I mean, Hemingway said, and I love this quote, "The world breaks everyone, and afterwards many are stronger at the broken places. But those that will not break, it kills." And so we will break. There's no shame in breaking. There's no problem with breaking. We actually then get repaired, and we're stronger at the broken spot. Like we repair ourselves constantly and put ourselves back together. So it's okay. It's okay to feel broken because we are. And the impact we have on other people is a constant feedback loop, and it's our responsibility to keep that loop open. Like we have to welcome that in. We always have to create a feedback loop for people. We have to make it comfortable for people to give us feedback. And again, I want to be clear, red, yellow, green highlighters. Just because somebody's telling you something doesn't mean you have to do something with it. You still have to discern if that fits and matches. Now, I'm not saying discard things you don't like to hear. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is make sure that even if it stings a little bit, is it meaningful to you? Does it connect with where you're trying to go? So remember, it's not by what you believe in yourself, but how other people experience you differently that you measure your evolution. Hopefully those two things match. Hopefully when you see that they're experiencing you differently, it matches what you believe about yourself. I'm not saying one is definitively more important than the other. I'm saying you need both. You can't just do one or the other. Those two things have to come back together. Now, we're going to briefly touch on the existential weight of this, right? Because in existentialism, we think there are 4 ways that we experience the world. One is subjective, is our own subjective experience of the world. Phenomenologically, that's all we can do is our own lived experience. Then we experience ourselves in relationship with others. Then we experience the connection with the physical environment and also with the spiritual and ideal world that we have. But I want to focus on number 2, which is our experience with other people. Because if you think about this, long before a mirror was invented, our reflection was other people. Like that's how we got a reflection of ourselves, was from others. And so when you really truly think about this, when you think about Sartre and his play No Exit, the message there was the power that other people have to deny our autonomy. The phrase that came out of that one-act play was "hell is other people." And there's a real deep meaning to that. But we have to understand that evolution is not an internal process, but an external revelation, right? It's not an internal process. It's an external revelation. We work on the process, but that doesn't matter. What matters is the external revelation. And the hardest thing, we have to be cognizant of this as well for other people. The hardest thing in the evolution process is those that are close to us allowing us to evolve. Because we all categorize each other. We all kind of put people in a bucket. You know, we're used to people that we know that are close to us. You know, we're those that we care deeply about. They have a version of us in their mind, so they're expecting certain things from us. What we're talking about is breaking that connection and saying, no, that's not what I'm about anymore. I'm about this. You're going to get this behavior from me, not this that you're used to. The hardest thing in that process is for them to actually recognize that behavior change. That's why you have to have the intestinal fortitude to do it over and over and over again. And doing it once isn't going to get you a pat on the back. I just accept this, right? We're talking about sustained behavioral change. It may take you months before they recognize and think that it's going to stick. So that's why you have to have both the internal motor to do it and then understand that it's the external piece that shows up that makes the difference. It's the external revelation that makes the difference. Your internal process is really important, but that external revelation matters. It's how they experience you that matters. It isn't about, I'm sad to say, but it isn't about what you wish to be. It's about what actually happens when you engage in the world. What mark do you leave? And remember, way back, I've said it in multiple episodes, what we're trying to do is leave the world better than we found it. We're trying to leave folks built up, not tore down from an interaction with us. Do I feel better or worse than I did before I interacted with you? Very rarely, on very rare occasions, probably less than 5% of the time, does somebody go, I feel about the same. I'm either feeling better or I'm feeling worse walking away from this interaction. So which do you want it to be? That's what we're talking about here. So remember, you cannot declare yourself evolved. Only those people that are impacted by you can say that. And then how do you want to test it? Well, you ask those people around you, have I evolved? So here's the challenge. Find one person this week, and ask them, what's different about me from 6 months ago? Now, be ready for the truth, their version of the truth, because again, they're going to give you one person's version of their experience with you. That's why you want multiple. That's why in a 360, you ask multiple people, right? Because when you ask 25 people that question and you get responses, you want to pay attention to the ones where there's repetition, right? If there's an outlier, it's called an outlier for a reason. You can think about it, you can ponder it, but you may not take it to heart. But if you ask 25 people, do you notice anything that's changed about me in the last 6 months? And you gather those responses, look for repetition. Look for things that show up over and over and over again. That's why you don't just want one person giving you feedback, because again, all they can tell you is their lived experience with you. That's all you can expect. And it's truthful because it's theirs. That's why it's so awesome when you get 20 people, because they're all giving you their lived experience with you. And if you see a commonality, then you can take that as something to work with. So remember, go out and find one person to talk to. And just ask them. And then write this stuff down. Then ask another person. And always make sure, remember, you want these feedback loops to be open. You want to establish, and one of the things we don't do very well at is we don't tell people how we like feedback. Because we want to frame it, and you want to ask them a specific question. In fact, you could ask a different question if you say, have you noticed that I've become more patient? Or you can say, have I become more patient with you? Have you experienced me differently? Ask them specifically. Try to avoid the open-ended questions because it's hard to imagine what you'll get back. But if you're working on 2 or 3 things, ask them about those things. Get feedback specifically on those things. So here's the thing. You're never going to know unless you ask. And you want to establish that feedback, and you want to have a positive response to the feedback, because if they don't get a positive response to the feedback, they're not going to offer it next time. And it will sting. We all know this, right? All the feedback stings initially. We want it, we value it, but it doesn't feel good when people give us honest feedback about how our behavior touches them, how they experience us. That's okay, because we're all just trying to get better, right? We're not trying to be perfect. We're not trying to be the best. We're just trying to get better. We're trying to be better versions of ourselves every day. So if you're ready to stop waiting and start doing, you're obviously in the right place. Keep questioning, keep pushing, and remember, growth isn't comfortable, but ultimately, comfort just wants you dead anyway. So I'll see you the next time in the Potential Leader Lab.